Thank you very much, everyone, and welcome to the session 6 of the Asan North Korean Forum, the second day. Our session will talk about North Korea's external relations. My name is Han-Kwon Kim. I will be a moderator of this session. I am the research fellow and the director of the China policy of the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. I will, first of all, introduce our panels. The first one is Dr. Cha Duhyeogn. He's executive vice president of the Korean Foundation. He was a research fellow at the Korean Institute for Defense Analysis, we called KAIDA. There he served as a director of North Korea Research Division. As an expert of security and North Korean issue, he served as acting secretary to the president for the crisis information in 2008. And our next speaker is Dr. Narushige Michishita. He's an association professor of National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies. The Professor Michishita was a senior research fellow at the National Institute for Defense Studies in the Japanese Ministry of Defense. He worked as a deputy director of the Bureau of Defense Policy. Our third speaker is Dr. Zhijiang. He's a professor of Sun Yat-sen University in Guangdong Province, China. He's also the superintendent of Korea Institute at the university, and Dr. Wei was a visiting professor at National Taiwan University, Korea University in South Korea, and also as well as Yonsei University in South Korea. He's a very top class of Chinese scholar who can talk about North Korean issues under the Northeast Asian international politics. And our last speaker is Dr. Alexander Zhebin. Dr. Zhebin is a director of the Center for Korean Studies at the Institute of Far Eastern Studies. Dr. Zhebin previously was a journalist with the TASS news agency, worked as a correspondent and the bureau chief in Pyongyang in DPRK. He also served as a diplomat in Russian embassy in Pyongyang. He's one of the few the North Korean expert who has a background of journalist and diplomat, as well as the international the relations expert. First of all, I will give our mic to the Dr. Cha Duhyeogn. Before that, let me explain the background of North Korean explanation. As we know, after the third nuclear test early this year, North Korean the leaders show very the obvious behavior in the international arena. Sometimes they threatened the peace and stability of Northeast Asian international relations. At the same time, they seems to longing for talk with the U.S. as well as South Korea. And now the Chinese government become another moderator to attract all related states to the negotiation tables, as we call it, the six-party talks. So under these all circumstances, we invited 4 speakers based on different background from South Korea, China, Russia, and Japan. I'm very happy to take a moderator job here. Probably we can have a discuss about this issue with various different perspectives from different background. We will start with Dr. Cha's presentation, but as we do, Dr. Cha wants to use a PPT. As we did yesterday, all stage we will make concession to the Dr. Cha, and other speakers will be down there. Professor Dr. Cha, please.
Oh, it's my great pleasure and honor to have a privilege to present my paper in famous Asan North Korean conference and to discuss with distinguished scholars and practitioners. And first and foremost, I would like to express my sincere appreciation for Asan Policy Institute to give me this good opportunity. The main theme or thought of my presentation is that while we usually think North Korea has been isolated and has desperately used brinkmanship as its main strategy in external relations, its strategies have been sophisticated and evolved. Moreover, in some aspects, North Korea has exploited the image of isolated regime or system. The main contents of my presentation, as you see in the screen. For example, North Korea was isolated from Western Bloc, but not isolated in its own bloc during Cold War period. During this time, the foreign policy of North Korea was based on two pillars: bilateral relations with the former Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China. By maintaining a delicate balance between Beijing and Moscow to prevent entrapment in a Sino-Soviet dispute started in the late 1950s. It also managed the external relations with the supplementary relations with other communist countries and non-alignment powers. And sometimes these strategies gave benefit to North Korea in some diplomatic maneuver in international organizations, including United Nations. However, this environment began to fundamentally change at the start of the post-Cold War era in the early 1990s. The collapse of Soviet Union and the reform of China induced a relative weakening of North Korea's diplomatic ties with these countries. Its external isolation went steadily downhill with the regime transformation of East European countries and decline of the collective influence of non-alignment powers. For example, there were no high-level personal exchange with China in 1990s, and there also was abolition of the Friendship, Cooperation, and the Mutual Assistance Treaty with Russia in 1995. North Korea tried to overcome its crisis through the improvement of relations with the former main enemy, so to say the United States, but its effort did not realize meaningful progress even after the agreed framework of 1994. Pyongyang suffered greatly from the outward march of the mid-1990s and mid-1990s in terms of both external relations as well as the domestic economy. However, in some aspects, it utilized the isolation to insulate its system from the changes of the outside and the flow of the information. However, an opportunity allowed to break through the crisis after the South-North Summit in 2000. North Korea was able to obtain diplomatic leverage by exploiting domestic debate on North Korean policy within South Korean society. And it also utilized peace offensive combined with periodical provocations. It also succeeded in expanding relations with the European Union member countries. Moreover, the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation reassessed strategic value of North Korea in context with their rivalry with the United States. In particular, Beijing created the diplomatic slogans such as peaceful rising and the harmonious world, and began to take advantage of the United States contained regional law by showing meaningful rapprochement with with North Korea. The fact that the military and diplomatic pressure that Washington had the ability to exert, yes, so to say, Washington's ability was so restricted to deal with all outposts of tyranny, especially dealing with North Korea, because there would be too big risk to handle North Korea by military measures comparing with the Middle East countries. For that reason, United States depends on dialogues and the diplomatic pressures despite North Korea's continuous challenges to international non-proliferation regime. As a result, it makes a kind of paradoxical situation. North Korea has continued bad behavior, but not really punished. Because of diverse purposes, different approaches of the 5 countries in 6-party talks, and it gave North Korea a strategic flexibility. North Korea have made periodical deadlock and return to the dialogue and adjust its own pace and speed in dialogue and provocation. And there were also North Korea's continuous violation of agreements. And there were so many United States Security Council resolutions, including the number 1718 to 2094. But there was no change in North Korea's behavior. North Korea sometimes threatened to break away from dialogue and threatened to be ready to the war, and sometimes declare the state of nuclear state. And through these measures, it has maximized its own readiness and appealed to regional and international opinions. From then on, intimidation became a core strategy of North Korea in external relations. It has continuously threatened the cancellation of the denuclearization process whenever it does not find the current situation to its taste. This strategy was reinforced by enhancement of the weapons of mass destruction capability, including ICBMs. In short, North Korea has sophisticated traditional brinkmanship by hinting that its behavior is not mere bluffing. Another version of North Korea's brinkmanship was tailored provocation, which is solely targeted to South Korea. In every case of provocation, North Korea has argued that its behavior was inevitable because of Seoul's provocative policies and tried to appeal to audience at the regional and the global levels. In a way, North Korea's intimidation strategy has been used even toward old friends, especially to People's Republic of China. The concern of neighboring countries about contingency in North Korea and the subsequent revealing of these signs by Pyongyang has been the bulwark that prevents these countries from excessive pressure toward North Korea. In some aspects, Pyongyang tried to give a message to the outside world. Yes, now we establish our style, Pyongyang style. Yet, it can be guaranteed, however, that North Korea's multidimensional intimidation strategy will be effective in the future. First and foremost, new South Korean government was not unshakable, and it showed a consistent approach of North Korea under the theme of the confidence and trust building process in Korean Peninsula. Also, United States have adapted themselves to this strategy, while some traditional friends, including China, has been showing that their affections in regard to North Korea behavior has thinned and decreased. But, moreover, North Korea's strategy of intimidation shortened the possibility of the sustaining possibility of the inducing the investment toward North Korea. So to say, it is very doubtful North Korea had durable for sustaining this strategy. Yes, so to say, there clearly exists the possibility of more severe isolation rather than strategic benefit. Then, how should we handle North Korea? There was two sides. One is common, and another is for South Korea. First and foremost, the 5 parties of 6-party talks should expand the opportunities of frank and transparent dialogues among 5 parties. And we also must set up the minimum desirable end state of North Korea-related issues. What desirable end state we want? What desirable end state China want and the United States want? Including the whole our regime transformation, or the establishment of the more moderate regime under the socialist system? Yes, now we share now we should share the desirable end state on North Korea. We also consider establishing the common rules of games. For example, agreements of non-exploitation of North Korean contingency. We need to create a real red line and common course of action, and we also should develop cooperative and collective carrot for North Korea's positive change. Seoul also should set up its own style, yes, Seoul style toward North Korea. Now, some scholars and analysts and bureaucrats regard the change of the attitude and the behavior of North Korea as a surrender with a flag of truce. But it's very risky approach. We'd better to prepare to the worst case scenario. So to say, we keep in mind the possibility that Pyongyang has a very deliberated and sophisticated strategy in returning to the dialogue. So, we should deliberate cooperative strategies with neighboring countries, especially with the United States and China. And South Korea should aim multiple law depend on issues. For example, leading law in the South-North reconciliation trust building and the bridging law in diplomatic normalization between the United States and North Korea. South Korean government also have to establish a clear mid and long-term vision on peninsula issues and sharing it with neighbors. What our current policy is different from the policies of the former administration? What is the detailed characteristic of the confidence and the trust building process in Korean Peninsula? Finally, we also should develop various flexible policy, not only to hardline policy, but also to soft-line carrot that can appeal to regional and global opinion. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cha. It was an excellent presentation. And sorry for the little interruption of this session. Let me have a small discussion with Dr. Cha after his presentation while Dr. Michishita prepare for his presentation. He has a very important, he pointed out very important elements to understand and analyze the North Korean external relations and how the related countries will cooperate with each other. One of the important point is that how we clear the red line and work together with other take shares in Northeast Asian international politics. In my understanding, whenever I talk with Chinese scholars, sometimes I felt that Chinese bureaucrats and experts, they seemed to hesitate to clear red lines because they don't want to collapse the Kim Jong-un regime at this point. And also they want, the Chinese government want to maintain the control power over influence over the Korean peninsula. How do you think how we work with China Chinese government to make a red line at this point?
I never argued that we should establish a red line to punish or to carry out a function toward North Korea. The red line is clearly needed for how we collectively react to North Korean bad behavior and how we should do for making the North Korea to returning the normal condition and the normal way. It's not the way for it's not the purpose of the sanction or punishment, but for the measures to leading and supporting the North Korea as a normal system.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cha. Now we move to the Japanese perspective. The Dr. Michishita, please, is stage all yours.
Thank you very much. I would like to talk about three things today. One is North Korea's game plan. Two is a future scenario in which North Korea may take some kind of provocative action in the Yellow Sea again. And three, possibility of Japan DPRK normalization. First, let me talk about North Korean game plan. But before I get into the game plan, how I see it, let me talk about how I distinguish North Korean actions, military actions between 2009 and 2010, and North Korea's similar actions since 2012. I regard, North Korean actions, military actions between 2009 and 2010 as part of Kim Jong-il's attempt to educate and train and educate his son Kim Jong-un to be a leader of North Korea. Because if you are would like to become a leader of North Korea, you should be able to use force effectively and efficiently and skillfully. So Kim Jong-un needed some training. And if you take a look at what happened, North Korea launched a Taepodong missile in April 2009, conducted the second nuclear test in May the same year, engaged in a naval battle, relatively small, but in the Yellow Sea, in the Battle of Taechon-Haejeon. And also in 2010, in March, North Korea sank South Korean corvette Cheonan. And in November, they launched shells to Yeonpyeon Island. Okay, this is very interesting because these military actions did not accompany any diplomatic actions. That means these actions are not a part of traditional brinkmanship diplomacy, because there is no diplomatic aspect to it. So that's partly why I see it as a part of a training and education process. And also, if you take a look at what they use, what the North Koreans used, they used missile, they used nuclear weapon, they used Navy, they used special operation forces to sink Cheonan, they used the army to shell the Yeonpyeong Island. So they basically used most important part of pillars of its armed forces, except Air Force, to which I will come back later. Since 2012, things has been a little bit different, because I think there has been new element added to North Korean actions, which is a diplomatic consideration. Because since if you take a look at what they have done since 2012, I think there are two elements, objectives. One is to further consolidate or help further consolidate Kim Jong-un's position in North Korean political leadership. And also the second additional objective is to restart or resume traditional brinkmanship diplomacy with an objective to normalize or improve relations with the United States. And let me talk about let me talk about North Korean game plan, how they are trying to do the job this time around. In my opinion, in order to make it easy or easier for the United States to come up, accept the deal, some kind of a new agreement, North Koreans are trying to separate their nuclear and missile program into two parts. One, military programs, and the two, peaceful programs. So they are saying, well, actually there are two parts to our nuclear programs, peaceful part and military part, and there are also two parts to our missile program, military part and peaceful part. How they are doing the job. They are basically saying, well, as long as to the nuclear program, as long as plutonium-based nuclear program is concerned, this is military program, to bolster deterrent capabilities against the United States. But they say that as long as when it comes to uranium program, this is actually peaceful program they are developing in order to fuel a light water reactor that they have been building in Yeonpyeong since 2009. And also on missiles, they are saying, well, Scud missiles, they haven't said it, but the implication has been Scud missile, Nodon missiles, Ken-08, which came out for the first time in the last year's military parade. These things are military for military purposes. But UNA missiles, which we call a Tepodon-2, UNA rockets are satellite launch vehicles designed for military, peaceful purposes of space development. How they have done the job in distinguishing these things. Let me show you some examples. But by the way, one caveat is that when I talk about these things that North Koreans are distinguishing their program into two parts, I'm not saying we should accept their argument. I'm only talking about it in order to understand the North Korean logic so that we can come up with a better response strategies or policies. All right, let me take a look at, point out several things that they have done to justify their argument. In February last year, the United States and North Korea came up with, agreed on what's called the Leap Day Agreement, in which North Korea agreed not to launch long-range missile. Okay, that was an agreement. Then, after 2 weeks after this, North Korea announced they are going to launch a satellite with UNA-3, right? Why did they do this? I think it was not a mistake; it was intentional. They were saying basically, by doing so, they are saying, well, we agreed not to launch long-range missile, but now we are launching the satellite. This is not missile. So they, made this very complicated. It's very hard to understand their logic. But to me, the logic was clear that they are trying to. This was a part of their attempt to make a clear distinction between peaceful program and military program that they have. And also, we have already talked about how North Korea acknowledged the failure of launch in April last year, just several hours after the launch. Again, this was, I think, was a part to show that this was a peaceful program because, there was nothing wrong about this, so why don't we be transparent about our failure? And then in December last year, North Korea successfully launched this UNA-3 rocket and successfully put the satellite into orbit. So they have now in a good shape, and they can, credibly argue that they are engaged in peace development, space development program rather than military missile program. But at the same time, certainly, it is true that North Korea could show by launching the long-range missile, show the rudimentary ability to deliver a small object to the continental United States. And then, interestingly, in April this year, North Korean Supreme People's Assembly, I think, enacted a law called Space Development Law, and then decided to create a new organization called State Space Development Bureau. So I think by now they have created the situation in which they can, not necessarily credibly, but credibly say that, argue that they are engaged in peaceful space program. With regard to a nuclear program, as I said, in 2009, North Korea came out and said, well, they had been denying the existence of uranium enrichment program before June 2009, but in June 2009, they certainly came out without any pressure, outside pressure from any other countries, came out and say, well, we have new uranium enrichment program to fuel a light water reactor, and then started to construct this new light water reactor in Yeongbyon. And then in this year, March, this has continued, and this argument has kind of been revived recently. In March this year, Kim Jong-un, North Korea basically announced that they are trying to develop self-reliant nuclear energy program by producing a nuclear enrichment program and light water reactor, and which is almost complete in Yeongbyon right now. So it's kind of interesting how they are trying to make things look like, well, there are two parts to their programs, and if well, I don't know how we should respond to their argument, but these are things that they will be talking about, I think, in the future six-party talks and other US-DPRK talks, so we should be prepared based on this understanding. All right, let me move to the second issue of possibility of future provocation, military provocation. For that, I would like to show you a map of the Yellow Sea. I think the likely scenario, one likely scenario for military provocation in the future is there are two scenarios. One is a sharing of they shelled Yeongbyon Island here, these islands, in November 2010. But now my guess is they might in the future start to launch artillery shells into this sea area between the NLL, this line, northern limit line, and this dotted line, which is actually claimed by the North Korean side. And another possibility is that North Korea might fly aircraft, fighter aircraft from Tetan. There is a aircraft airbase to the south across the NLL and back, in order to undermine the credibility of the northern limit line. So there will be two objectives. One is to undermine credibility of the NLL, and also kind of stimulate debate within South Korea about legality of the NLL, or whether over the propriety of whether to continue to uphold the NLL or to talk or to become a little bit more, how to say, flexible in protecting the line. And another potential objective of North Korea is to demonstrate the need to replace the armistice agreement with a peace agreement. Okay, and why is North Korea likely to do it? Because there is a kind of weakness in South Korean argument in this area, legal argument. Because the thing is, countries involved, North Korea, South Korea, and the United States disagree over the status of this sea area between the NLL and the line claimed by North Korea. By the way, can I use the microphone? Yep. By the way, this line claimed by North Korea, in a tacit manner, North Korea started to talk about, suggest this line in 2006 in kind of offshore talks, inter-Korean military talks, but they have not publicized this line too much yet. But I think they will start to publicize this, suggest this, propose this line more proactively in the future. And the interesting thing is, actually, this line is based on the ANKC, United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. So this is, if you assume a peacetime condition, this line is pretty legitimate. So this is a kind of difficult part. So let me go back to the question of how different countries characterize this sea area. North Korea certainly characterized this sea area as a part of their territorial water. And the South Korean government does not say this belongs to South Korean territorial waters, but it claims that this is a part of their operational sea area, 작전해역. And the United States, if you ask the US government officials, they would say, well, this area is actually a part of high seas. So, 공해. So they disagree. North Koreans know that they all three parties disagree over the status of this sea area. So they are they know how they might be able to exploit the differences in order to put forward their argument or claim that we should replace the armistice agreement with a peace agreement. All right, let me move to the third and last issue of Japan DPRK relationship. But let me give you one caveat again, which is what I'm going to say now is entirely based on news reports, and I don't have any background information, so please understand that. All right, the people argue whether or not Japan might be trying to normalize relations with DPRK right now under the Abe administration. My answer is no, it's not thinking about normalization of diplomatic relations right away. But the thing is, it seems that the Abe administration is thinking about resolving the abduction issue quite apart from normalization. And how they are trying to do it by sending Mr. Isao Iijima to Pyongyang to meet. He met Kim Yong-nam and other foreign minister officials in charge of Japanese affairs. and things like that. And this guy, Mr. Iijima, was a secretary, very close aide to the former Prime Minister Koizumi, who made two visits to Pyongyang in 2002 and 2004. And in fact, the 2004 visit was organized by this guy, Iijima. So he has that kind of involvement. He has been involved, and he has ties. All right. The Japanese government, for the time by now, have identified 17 abductees as officially identified 7 abductees to have been abducted by North Korea. But there are more people. People talk about 73 people. There are 73 people who have likely been abducted by North Korea, but whom the Japanese government had not designated officially as their abductees. So what the Japanese government seems to be telling the North Koreans is, well, if you return all live abductees right away in just one big shot, we might not be able to normalize relations with you, but we might be willing to provide, significant, meaningful amount of economic aid. And so I think that was a message that Iijima, conveyed to the North Korean side, and I think the ball is in the North Korean court right now, and I don't know whether North Korea can, respond positively to our overture, but we'll see. But I mean, for the time being, there will be no diplomatic normalizations. The government position has been consistent. Unless nuclear, missile, and abduction issues are solved, there will be no normalization. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Michishita. Thank you. Yes, we are just a little bit behind the schedule, so I give my mic directly to the Dr. Wei Zhijiang. He will talk about the North Korean foreign policy and its trend after the Kim Jong-un inauguration. Dr. Wei, please.
这个首先感谢这个阿山政策研究院，特别是要感谢这个韩在峰院长跟金汉奎所长特别允许我以中文在这里做发表那么这个我的发表呢，也是分为3个部分虽然我是讨论金正恩政权的这个外交政策及其走向问题。但是呢，我们都知道，外交是作为内政的一个延续，所以呢，我第一个问题呢，还要简单的谈一下，就是金正恩政权的这个内政的变化。其实上一场呢，大家可能已经讨论了很多金正恩政权执政以后它内政的变化。我这里呢，简单的就谈这个3个方面的变化。第一个就是说金正恩政权执政以后，它整个的党政军的权力机构体系。其实发生一个明显的转变。刚才这个李教授已经提到，那么也就是说，由过去单纯的强调这个先军政治，实际上呢是在强调这个劳动党在国家政治和军队中的绝对的领导地位。也就是说，金正恩政权对权力机构调整的一个方向，就是强化北韩劳动党在国家政治和军队中的这种核心地位。那么先军政治，我个人觉得呢，虽然它不会被抛弃，但是呢会逐渐的淡化这是第一个方面的变化。第二个方面的重大变化呢，就是大家都知道，就是金正恩政权呢明确提出了，就是说核武能力与经济发展并重的这样一个国家的发展战略。那么尽管韩国或者国际社会很多人对金正恩政权推行的这个新的核武力与经济发展国家战略，这个好像并不看好，甚至提出批评。但是呢，我个人觉得他与他的父亲 金正日时代相比，毕竟呢，他是把发展经济、改善民生提高到了与核武、安保并重的这么一个地位，所以呢，我们应该正视客观上正视这一个积极的变化。第三个方面的变化就是，大家都知道，这个金正日委员长时代，对市场经济曾经做过一个取缔，包括货币改革的失败。那么金正恩上台以后，那么北韩在市场经济方面经历了由取缔到默认，然后呢再到事实上承认这样一个变化。我说的事实上承认，就是北韩没有立法，没有制定国家法律来承认市场经济，但是呢，北韩政府在国家的政策，就内部政策方面，已经肯定的市场经济的这个合法性。那我为什么这么说？因为去年11月份，我专门去北韩的先锋罗京做了考察，与这个罗先地区的这个海运大学，这是以前的海军大学的校长做了一个座谈。那么他们在座谈中公开的说，市场经济讲究公平和效率，对国家的经济发展呢是必须的。那么我们考察了罗先地区2个很大的市场，一个是农产品跟轻工业品的市场，还有一个就是海产品的市场。那么这2个市场的规模与中国80年代初那个市场相比毫不逊色，并没有什么大的差异。所以从罗先地区的情况来看，从政府官员到普通的市民，其实头脑中已经有了比较明显的，或者说呢这个比较深入的这种市场经济的意识。所以我把北韩呢内政的变化就概括为这样3个方面。当然呢，我觉得今后北韩在内政方面最大的挑战，并不是他政权稳不稳定的问题。我觉得金正恩这1年以来呢，他的政权结构已经趋于稳定。他最大的挑战是来自于他的核武力，就是核发展与经济发展、经济改革、经济调整，这2者之间的关系怎么样把握它的平衡？那么这个将会对北韩政权构成一个挑战。这是我简单的，就是要先把北韩内政的变化做一个说明。那么第2个方面呢，我们就谈一下金正恩政权这1年以来他外交政策的变化。我觉得呢，金正恩政权在外交上最大的一个外交战略，还是希望通过改善这个北美关系，通过实现北美之间关系的正常化，同时呢，把韩半岛的这个停战机制转换为这个和平机制。那么这是北韩可以说从金正日到金正恩以来一直所谋求的一个基本的外交战略。那为了达到这个战略，那么我们看到金正恩政权是施展了软硬2个方面。软的方面就是通过纽约渠道，积极的谋求与美国进行双边会谈。那么硬的方面就包括进行导弹的研制，进行这个核试验，这个进行战争挑衅，包括宣布废除停战协定等等。那么也就是推行所谓的战争边缘性的这种策略。不管是金正恩政权是希望通过纽约会谈来改善美北关系，还是通过战争挑衅来制造韩半岛的这种战争危机，其根本目标只有一个，就是希望与美国改善关系，实现美北关系正常化，同时呢，把韩半岛的这种和平这种停战协定转变为和平协定。但是美国对这个北韩的这种外交政策是怎么样回应的呢？我个人认为呢，这个奥巴马政府呢基本上仍然是在推行就是所谓的战略性忍耐这样一个对北韩的基本政策。战略忍耐应该说前任的希拉里·克林顿国务卿在对北韩政策上是非常具有高超的政治智慧的，或者说是有战略智慧的。那么这个 北韩不管是挑衅也罢，还是谋求美北双边会谈也罢，美国基本上是采取一种静观其变的办法。为什么呢？因为北韩对美国来说并不具有多大的战略价值。那么美国可以在中东投入兵力去解决中东的伊拉克、阿富汗问题，包括现在的叙利亚的问题。因为中东对美国来说具有重大的能源的这个能源利益，还有有巨大的地缘战略利益。但是北韩对美国来说并没有什么重大的战略利益。那么与其改善与北韩的关系，还不如保留一个挑衅的或者说无赖的这样的一个政权，保留在这里，那么美国更可以利用这个机会介入韩半岛地区，从而增强美国在韩半岛跟东北亚的这个战略的遏制力和影响力。所以我个人觉得，从美国的东北亚战略来判断，应该说目前的奥巴马政府所实施的对韩半岛的战略是这个最为成功的，也是充满了政治或者战略智慧的。当然，这个美国也并不希望北韩政权发生崩溃，或者说美国并不希望用武力来解决北韩的问题。正是在这一点上，所以我个人认为美国跟中国之间在韩半岛的这个和平和稳定方面，中美之间具有共同的战略利益。那么这是北韩这个希望通过就是改善美北关系来打破联合国安理会对他制裁所造成的一个外交上的孤立的格局，来希望建构一个就是北韩的一种所谓和平的国际环境。那么在对中政策方面，金正恩政权在对中政策方面也发生了一个变化，就是由最初金正恩上台以后，最初开始比较轻视中国。为什么这么说？因为中国在安理会投票赞成对北韩制裁以后，大家都知道北韩发表了一个公开的声明。这公开的声明就是指责中国跟俄罗斯，认为是放弃了大国应该所具有的维持国际社会公正性的这样一个立场。那么同时金正恩在他的内部谈话中还批评北韩这个政府内阁，说你们进口的中国的东西太多了，特别是中国的轻工艺品太多了。那么这个我们后来发现，就是说美北关系并没有根本的改善，使北韩意识到，就是说他在外交上要打破这种外交孤立的格局不得不再重新回过头来改善、恢复和发展与中国的关系。这就有了下面的一系列的变化，就包括这个派出了北韩这个人民军的军队的总政治局长这个崔龙海来访华。这个通过崔龙海访华，主要目的就是试图来恢复因为这个核试验受到损害的这个朝中关系。除此以外，金桂冠副外相这个访华，明确向中方承诺将无条件的重返六方会谈。大家都注意到，这个朝鲜停战协定60周年的时候，中国派出了国家副主席李元朝访问平壤，标志着就是朝中之间这种传统的睦邻友好关系得到了恢复。但是我们也注意到一个基本的内容，就是说这个李元朝访问平壤的时候，两国发表的这个有关的谈话，中国是第一次没有使用鲜血凝成的战斗友谊这样的一个概念，第一次没有使用。那么这个除了朝中关系以外，我个人还觉得金正恩政权还在推行或者奉行一个全方位的外交政策，包括改善与日本的关系，包括积极发展与东南亚国家，这个包括越南、柬埔寨这些国家的关系，还谋求发展与中东甚至欧洲的关系。应该说，金正恩政权这个其实已经意识到北韩并不能孤立于国际社会。 这是呢这个金正恩政权执政以后他的外交政策的变化。最后它的走向，第3个方面就是它的走向。我个人认为呢，就是说，那从目前来看，那美北关系不可能取得根本的进展。那这个朝中关系会得到进一步的恢复或强化，尤其是朝中之间有可能建立一个就是战略性的这种合作关系。那么这个最终北韩的外交政策向何处发展？它并不取决于南北韩本身，也并不取决于朝中之间，而是取决于美国对韩半岛或东北亚战略的调整，取决于美北关系的它的发展的趋向。好，我的报告完了，谢谢大家。
Thank you very much, Dr. Wei. I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry that we don't have enough time. We have delayed coffee break previous of our session. So, and also our audience wanted to join our discussions. So Professor Zhebin, please presentation in 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I would like to extend my thanks to the President Ham and Asan Institute for invitation and opportunity to speak before distinguished scholars and experts on Korean affairs. In my presentation on North Korean external relations, I deal with 2 major directions of these relations, attempts to improve relations with the United States and on inter-Korean relations. Generally speaking, North Korean foreign policy, contrary to widespread perception of being unpredictable, irrational, and provocative, in fact, demonstrated a surprisingly high level of consistency, pragmatism, and ability to compromise. Amidst all upheavals of international politics the country have to face with after the dissolution of its major ally, the Soviet Union, Pyongyang has managed to realize 2 successful power transfers and ensure political and social stability. While crossing all red lines in development of her nuclear and missile programs, North Korea has succeeded at keeping at bay all attempts to achieve a soft landing of the regime and preserve her independence. Pyongyang leaders have demonstrated a rare art of diplomatic maneuvering by making 4 major world powers, United States, China, Russia, and Japan, to negotiate with North Korea. In particular, during the last 2 decades, North Korea was rather consistent in her efforts to reach some accommodation or better relations with the United States, because Pyongyang perceives the United States policy as a major threat to the regime existence. The history has proved that economic inducements are not sufficient to make North Korea to give up her nuclear ambitions. North Korea's security concerns are a key issue to be addressed in order to find a solution to the nuclear problem. Soon after the 6-party talks were commenced, Seoul offered to Pyongyang deliveries of electricity equal to those 2 light water reactors not constructed by KIDA would have produced. The North Koreans have not agreed. The same sad fate of the 2 Clemenbach's Duhyeogn openness 3000 proposal and other similar and seemingly attractive bites, including the so-called Leap Day deal reached by United States and North Korea in February last year. All these cases have proved once again that habitual emphasis made by many experts and majority of media on economic benefits which will get North Korea in case it gives up its nuclear ambitions was a wishful thinking. Moreover, such approach leads us away from the essence of the problem. While paying attention to economic aspects of settlement, it is necessary to remember that nuclear problem on the Korean Peninsula was caused first of all by security crisis in the area. Economic factors matter too, but security considerations were certainly at the forefront for North Korean leaders. The nuclear problem emerged at the beginning of the 90s as a North Korean reaction to drastic deterioration of her security situation caused by two major international developments. The first one was the Soviet Union dissolution and de facto unilateral abrogation by a new Russian leadership of the bilateral military political treaty between Moscow and Pyongyang. The second factor was unilateral use of force by United States and other NATO member countries with the purpose of regime change in a number of sovereign countries in Europe and Asia. Was another factor, trials of former Communist and Socialist Party Politburo members and ex-presidents in Europe, Asia, and Middle East, especially the miserable fate of Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi, and their generals, frightened North Korean leadership, being unsure of Chinese security guarantees and deprived them by Russia, considering United States' unwillingness to deal with North Korean security concern in earnest, North Korea resorted to the nuclear option as the only plausible option to prevent humanitarian intervention. World history provides us with some examples when states are pushing for such a choice because of real or imaginary threat. For example, in the 70s, South Korea, frightened by the prospect of sudden rapprochement between the United States and China, would deprive her of the American shield, made attempt to acquire nuclear weapon. And these ambitions were curbed only after Washington reconfirmed its security guarantees to Seoul. Some people argue in favor of putting off normalization with North Korea after North Korea satisfies their demands not only concerning nuclear issue, but also those about reduction of conventional armaments, liquidation of stocks of chemical and bacteriological weapons, human rights, export of narcotics, fake dollars, and so on. In view of such position, negotiation on the nuclear issue from North Korean point of view are losing any sense, because even full satisfaction of the United States and its allies' demand on non-proliferation agenda would not allow Pyongyang to achieve a main objective for the sake of which North Korea has agreed to participate in these negotiations: better security as a result of normalization of relations with the United States. What would happen with the Soviet-American strategic arms limitation talks in 70s and 80s, for example, if human rights issue was included in this agenda? I believe that there would be no treaties on control and limitation of these armaments. North Korea missile launches and nuclear tests are nothing more than clear signal of Pyongyang frustration with Washington's stubborn refusal to work seriously for achieving mutually acceptable compromise, especially concerning North Korean security, and United States incessant resorting to pressure, sanctions, and demonizing North Korean leadership. So, taking into consideration domestic political situation, both in United States and the Republic of Korea and other countries directly concerned, it is plausible to suggest that the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula in the short and even medium term is unlikely. It would be more realistically to talk about preventing proliferation by North Korea of nuclear weapons and relevant technologies, as well as missiles and their workmanship. We can expect that North Korea will continue her course started in 2006, trying to solve the nuclear problem according to India model, calling the United States and other participants of the six-party talks to abandon double standards on nuclear and missile proliferation. By the way, such approach was partly provoked by the United States, which concluded so-called nuclear deal with India in 2006 in violation of both United States and international law governing the non-proliferation regime. Pyongyang behavior after satellite launch and third nuclear test show that in the foreseeable future, all of us have to deal with the de facto nuclear North Korea. The realities of modern international relations are unlikely to encourage North Korea leaders to give up their nuclear deterrent. Since there is not so much time, I will just conclude with some thing that I think that long pauses in six-party talks on the nuclear problem provide South and North Korea with an additional chance through their own joint efforts to eliminate the threat of conflict and move towards a more lasting peace and common prosperity. The best option that will benefit the entire Korean nation would be consistent efforts by both Korean sides to build mutual trust, reconciliation, and cooperation between North and South Korea. Both sides should patiently build up the institutional framework of mutual ties and fill them with a real content in order to ensure irreversibility of the progress already achieved and the results of inter-Korea cooperation. Refraining from actions which made the other party to be concerned for her security, ensuring sustainable cooperation in economic, cultural, and humanitarian fields are necessary conditions for the launch of the process of trust or confidence building between North and South Korea. President Park Geun-hye statements on this subject have not gone unnoticed in Russia. Now it is very important to move from the political statements to practical steps to build confidence and to refrain from those actions which undermine trust. Experience of dealing with North Korea testifies that excessive pressure and coercion had led, in majority of cases, to greater suspicion and hostility, while engagement and respect for certain positions shaped by history legacies brought about cooperation and compromise. The agreed framework of 1994, United States-North Korean joint communique reached during Vice Marshal Cho Min-rok visit to United States in October 2000, the United States Secretary of State Albright visit to Pyongyang have proved that a compromise is possible if both sides have a political will to achieve it. Sure, North Korea is not an easy partner to deal with. We in Russia know that better maybe than others because we have the longest history of bilateral relations. But if the military option is excluded, any political solution is not possible without certain compromises. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zhebin. We immediately open to the floor. We will gathering the several questions, and I will give panelists to each 2 minutes. So please raise your hands for the questions. Or let me ask you the first questions to the Dr. Michishita. We have a discussions yesterday, and we have a very interesting point that now the Japanese people give more credibility to the Abe Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, to dealing with North Korea about the abduction issues and as well as the normalization issues. Do you explain why they give more credibility?
Right. I think Mr. Abe is in a good position to talk to the North Koreans for 2 reasons. One is that there is a domestic support, because the voices coming from the abductees' family members are very important, but their attitude have changed in the past 10 years, because in 2002, when it was revealed that the North Korean government claimed that some of them had died already and is not alive or anymore, they got very angry, right? And for a good reason, and started to argue that Japan must put strong pressure on North Korea in order to change its mind and encourage it to return all abduction victims back to Japan. But it's been 10 years, and the pressure strategy has not worked. And so those family members have realized, well, and they are aging. They are, many of them are actually parents of abduction victims. So they are old already. They were old 10 years ago, but they have been, they are aging. And the time is, running out for them. So they are becoming more desperate about the situation. And they are now saying, well, regardless of means, we don't care about means. I mean, pressure, talk, anything is fine. What matters is results, right? Outcome. So, that means that, now they are actually encouraging the Japanese government to engage in discussions with North Korea rather than just putting pressure on the North Korean government in order to get good result. That helps Mr. Abe. And also, Mr. Abe is regarded as a hawk, right, in this country and in Japan. And he's a person regarded as a tough on North Korea. And this actually helps Mr. Abe, because if those people such as former Prime Minister Hatoyama or Kan, who are regarded as liberal, not necessarily pro-North Korea, but a pro-dialogue kind of person, if they had said, well, we are going to talk to the North Korean, people would say, well, these guys are too soft, and they are actually buying into North Korean kind of deception. But now Mr. Abe is regarded as tough person. So even if he say, well, we have to talk to the North Korean people, it's more like easier for the people to support him because he's a credible leader. So the situation is pretty good for him in engaging in talks with North Korea.
Thank you, Dr. Michishita. Okay, there is two questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen from abroad, my question is your perception of North Korea's seriousness about the resumption of six-party talks. If and when six-party talks resumed in the near future, removing all preconditions for reopening of six-party talks. This is, again, this assumption. Do you think that North Korea will go back to September 19, the agreement, and on the right track, go back to December 2008? The six-party failed to reach agreement on verification measures. Now, what is your perception? Particularly, Alexander, Professor Zhebin, and the Chinese scholar, or of course my friend Michishita, also three of us. I don't want to hear the Korean side, but scholars from abroad. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the gentleman in the second row.
지향장 교수님하고 제빈 연구원님께 간단히 여쭤보겠습니다. 북한의 그 핵 개발의 가장 큰 동기가 안보 위협 때문이라고, 그것의 그 여러 이유 중에 하나는 과거 동맹이었던 중국하고 러시아와 관계가 단절된 것도 포함된다고 얘기를 많이 합니다. 그런 차원에서 봤을 때 한국도 역시 지금 북한의 핵을 두려워하고 있지만, 위협을 얘기하고 있지만, 자체적인 핵 개발보다는 익스텐드 디터런스라는 그런 그 개념을 지금 상당히 정책적으로 고려를 많이 하고 있습니다. 그런 차원에서 봤을 때 북한의 핵을 포기하는 그런 하나의 그 개념적인 상상으로서 중국이나 러시아가 그런 그 익스텐드 디터런스를 얘기할 수는 없는 건지, 그런 것에 한번 생각을 해봤는데 의견을 듣고 싶습니다.
예, 감사합니다. Thank you very much. And is there any other questions? Okay, probably I think in the conclusion remarks, I will give each speakers for 1 or 2 minutes. And we have 2 questions. And also we discussed the major point that the North Korean external relations and foreign policy things, many people say it is unpredictable, as Dr. Zhebin said, irrational and provocative. At the same time, they show the very the similar patterns, threat, raising tensions, and conversation, talk with related countries, and get the reward from the neighboring countries. In that case, the Russia, China, South Korea, even in the US, they have changed their major policy toward North Korea. So how do you think, is that the related countries' foreign policy and foreign goal really affected North Korean international behavior or their foreign goals while they using the same pattern after the 3 nuclear tests? Dr. Cha, you're first.
Finally, I once again would like to highlight one fact that the more we try to put the North Korea in the corner without any agreed desirable end state and any other just purpose, yes, while North Korea more isolated, but they can have a flexibility to utilize and exploit it for their own sake. But regarding the one of the explanation why North Korea, what is the motivation of North Korea to develop the weapons of mass destruction, including the nuclear weapons? Yet some of my colleagues explained that that was the North Korean self-defense, or one of the measures of self-defense, to respond to the weakening alliance with the former Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China. There exists, however, some of the record and some of the proof that North Korea already tried to develop the weapons of mass destruction in 1970s and 1980s. At that time, clearly, they have 2 alliances in communist bloc. And finally, I would like to point out the fact that, yes, regarding the North Korean already the new line, so to say, 12 nautical mile line nearby the Yeonpyeong and the Baekneung Island. Yes, clearly, Korean Joint Chief of Staff and the Korean Armed Forces established a limited line for the military operation. But it's not a sign of acceptance of that kind of line. We only want to avoid the needless conflict and skirmish between North and South. It's not a sign of acceptance of that line. Thank you.
Okay. Regarding the question of whether North Korea would like to go back to the 6-party talks, certainly, I think yes. The answer is yes. But the problem is whether the United States is willing to go back to the talks, and that's, I think, it's basically up to the U.S. to decide. And it's interesting to see how North Koreans are resuming the operation of a 5-megawatt nuclear reactor in Yeonpyeong right now, and because this 5-megawatt nuclear reactor has been the most important factor in the first and the second rounds of the nuclear diplomacy that North Korea conducted between 1993 and 4, and then 2003 and 2008. So I think we are moving into the 3rd round of nuclear diplomacy right now. And with regard to the North Korea's objectives of acquiring nuclear weapons and missiles, I think, these are, multiple objectives, mixed objectives. One is certainly they are doing so for the purpose of gaining diplomatic bargaining chip. They are, developing them in order to bolster their deterrence. They are getting it in order to use them as a domestic political tool. And also now they have miniaturized nuclear, seems to have miniaturized nuclear device. They are becoming a part of their warfighting strategy, which is a bad news. Thank you very much.
好，我简单的回应一下。这不行，这个应该说，北韩方面呢，在六方会谈的立场上态度是非常明确的，那就是说无条件的重返六方会谈。那么国际社会呢，很多人批评北韩，认为呢它缺乏诚意。我个人认为呢，可能我们并不能这样简单的去指责北韩缺乏诚意。为什么呢？有2个方面的原因。第一个，这个重返六方会谈符合北韩目前的外交和安全利益，因为除了美北纽约渠道以外，那北韩只有在六方会谈这样一个多边的场合，才能够来这个努力的取得自己国家安全利益的诉求。这是北韩呢从外交上那需要六方会谈。那另外一个方面，从这个朝中关系，就中朝关系的这个角度来看，北韩为了强化与中国的这种合作，那这个北韩呢也需要通过重返六方会谈来这个加强与中国呢在这个北核问题乃至韩半岛这个和平这个协定等问题上，与中国呢来进行一个协调和合作。同时呢，也正是在这一点上，北韩认为呢，他已经就是积极的回应了中方所提出来的以和平对话的方式来解决北核问题这样一个基本的立场。好，谢谢。
As far as I remember, the first question was addressed to me and was about how serious North Korea in its desire to improve relations with the United States. I strongly believe that North Korea is quite consistent in this policy, because without some compromise, with some agreement with the United States, North Korean leaders will not feel more or less secure first, and without such agreement, for North Korea will be very difficult to get access to world markets and get necessary investments and trade which will be necessary to modernize the country economy. And without that, it will be very difficult for regime to keep social and political stability in the country. But on the other hand, I am also strongly believe that United States, on some strategic geopolitical reasons and domestic political reasons, don't want any agreement with North Korea, bad or worse. Because let's imagine a situation just for a second, that tomorrow North Korea surrender all its nuclear and missiles to international community, to United States. What happened? North Korea threat disappeared. In that case, how to explain to the Congress, to taxpayers, and last but not the least, to Chinese and Russians, why missile defense established in Northeast Asia? Why for 60 years American troops are stationed along Chinese and Russian borders? Now it is possible to sit across the table, smile, and said, oh, that bad guy, Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-il, because of them we need missile defense, we need troops. If North Korea's threat disappeared, it will be not possible to save face. And here in Orient, it is very important to save face.
Thank you very much. We are behind about 10 minutes on our schedule, but I believe that I'm sure that the present points and discussions is much much valuable than the delayed 10 minutes. I will close our session, the 6th session, but before that, please give us a big hands to our excellent panelists. Please. Thank you very much.